welcome to another episode of Open Up the Workforce, where we speak with executives driving the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm your host, Ava Sadeghi, co-founder and CEO of Symba. Today, we have an exciting episode in store for you. We have Tina Mylon, the Chief Talent Diversity Officer at Schneider Electric. Tina is a powerhouse, driving inclusion at scale to over 150,000 employees. She's a global HR executive with broad experience in talent strategy, management, leadership development, talent acquisition, diversity, equity, inclusion, and more. Thank you so much for being with us today, Tina. Can you share a little bit more about your career story with us?
Sure, Ava. I'm super excited to be here, first of all, so thanks for inviting me. Maybe I'll start a little on the personal side. I don't know if that's the order you want, but when I think of some of my key social identities, I think about mother, I think about Asian American, I think about woman, and I think about leader. And on the last part, leader probably bleeds more into the question at heart, which is my career. I've been mainly in the human capital people space for a couple decades, and I love it. I'm a total fanatic, and probably half my career has been split on the consulting side, so working with companies on issues of culture, leadership, talent, organization, etc. And then half now is on the corporation side. So being part of two big European headquartered companies actually over the course of my career. And now I'm with Schneider Electric, having a fantastic time with a really cool role, which is Chief Talent and Diversity Officer. So I get to touch upon things like talent acquisition and branding, talent management, succession and learning, as well as the really nice sister twin to it, which is the diversity, equity, inclusion, and well-being side of the house.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing more. And I really appreciate how you identified your background from being a mother, a woman, Asian American. I really appreciate that so much. And would love to learn a little bit more about how did you get so passionate about this space? What brought you into this area?
I think for most of us who are in human resources, for example, let's be clear, I didn't grow up saying I want to be an HR person in the future. I don't think it's as tangible as saying I want to be a teacher or a police officer or a lawyer. But I think when you start to patch together over the course of your education and your professional career, what drives you. So I love working with people. I love strategy and concepts and thinking about what's next, especially through the people side. I love driving change and getting stuff done. I love being able to influence and engage hearts and minds. That doesn't mean necessarily translates directly into HR, but I found over the course of my time, especially my first job was being a high school history teacher, but there were certain things about those passions and interests that I started to realize after grad school, hey, the HR function and these topics of talent, culture, people were topics that the HR folks were really connected to with the business. And that organically drew me down that path. But I can tell you, it was not like a scripted path from day one.
And that's amazing. I loved history, and I was a teacher for 6 months in Korea. And it taught me so much about communication and how, sometimes, we say something and how it's perceived and actually understood. And I think that's really important when you are doing the work you're doing with diversity, equity, inclusion, when you really do have to be thoughtful, intentional around communication. I'm curious if that's impacted some of your ability.
Really totally. Well. I mean, it goes back to the simple tenet that we all know, right? Know your audience, know your customer, know your candidate, whatever the content. Because message is message. But if you don't understand from the receiving end how people are absorbing, processing, they have different vantage points or personas that they exhibit. So I think doing it with high school kids, it's a great way to first start because you're just challenged in a totally different dimension. And I'll put it really simply, Ava, like for me, probably being able to take often complex, nuanced topics and simplify the message so it has personal meaning, whatever your audience. Again, students who are 14 years old to customers or candidates I'm trying to recruit to Schneider Electric, that has taught me also the importance of the clarity as well as the flex to understand who you're talking to.
Thank you for sharing. I always say that it's possibly the hardest thing I've ever done was being a teacher. And I've learned so much to shape me in a lot of ways. And so to learn a little bit more about Schneider Electric and how you've been implementing some of your D&I efforts there, we'd love to dig in a little bit more. Can you share?
Yes. So I think the blessing I have, and believe me, it's not always easy, right? When you're in the DEI space, sometimes it indeed feels like a labor of love, right? Because you're not only driving topics, but you're trying to influence, convince, animate, right? So this is super important. I've had the blessing of our business very much, the way we set up our company, our business model. We're 150,000 people. We're equally distributed on the world. So you can imagine the automatic diversity that already comes with that. Half of our 150K people are shop floor, right? So when you think about folks at the plants, at the sites, at the distribution centers. So already the demographics in our business model, which is to be the most local of global companies providing energy solutions to the world, you already know that in order for our business to thrive, we have to be able to leverage diversity. We have to create an inclusive culture, and we have to create equitable opportunities. So I feel very lucky to have that match the business model in our strategy in what we're doing in the people DEI space. Probably for us, an interesting piece as we've evolved the strategy has been really making sure we bake what we call inclusion and care in our approach. It's nothing fancy, but in the end, DEI or diversity on its own, as you well know, doesn't do much if it doesn't create results in an inclusive way of working and equitable opportunities. And we've learned more and more, maybe COVID accelerated, that for most of our employees, care, well-being, mental health is also a complementary that's necessary to create an equitable place, right? Certain populations, depending on the country, also may be disproportionately impacted when it comes to certain policies, career opportunities, et cetera. So our job is to make sure not only do we bring diversity and inclusion, but create a care system around that to make sure things are equitable. That's our high-level philosophy on how we drive the strategy.
And that's incredible. And there's two things that I kind of want to double down on. First, 150K employees. So, wow, how do you do something like that at scale? And you talked about results. How do we measure results and understand that at scale?
But we talk about it every day because you're right. My job in global, I have to be quite ambitious and proactive to make sure our company is always thinking about the next horizon when it comes to talent DEI issues. At the same time, I have to be realistic, tied to the ground, and respectful in some ways, right, of the realities and the diverse realities at every country level, right? How we approach topics, what have you, gender, generations, LGBT plus. You can imagine the variance across cultures and countries. So my simple tenet is always to be a little ahead of the curve in a certain topic or a policy and really push our organization forward, but with a pragmatic sense of starting with one global first standard, right? So it's almost the lowest hanging fruit, and that's a global standard, and we encourage our countries to go farther. A classic example is our global family leave. It was so important to us 5 years ago to roll out for the first time a global policy that touched on maternity leave, paternity leave, bereavement, mental health care, all that. But we also had to benchmark and see what was the baseline and what was the market appetite by country. But we felt like it was just enough stretch to put the topic on the floor, make it scalable for the globe, and then challenge each of our countries to go above and beyond. That's, in simplistic terms, the spirit of how we do it. Of course, the execution is quite detailed, but I think for most of my DEI efforts that I've been involved with, that's kind of the approach we take.
That example is really, really insightful for so many reasons. I mean, in the United States, as a country, we don't even have a policy. So the fact that you've been able to do that on a global scale is just absolutely fascinating. And I'm excited to learn a little bit more about that. You mentioned that you try to stay ahead of the curve. How do you do that? Do you have people on the ground that you're communicating with? Are you, reading media? What do you do to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, it's a great question. On all levels, I guess at the level for a company, we do a lot of exchange in the external market, right? So as you may have seen with Schneider Electric, we're pretty public about our DEI commitments. We're part of our overall sustainability goals, kind of ESG goals that we communicate to the market. We're audited professionally by, and it's tied to the majority of the employees' bonus, right? So everyone knows the metrics that we're trying to reach around DEI as well as broader ESG goals. And because of that public exposure, we are super active in connecting with companies and sharing benchmarks. I'm part of, for example, the World Economic Forum and the Chief Diversity Officer Forum, and that's great, right? I think it's so easy sometimes you get sucked into your company, you end up staring at your own belly button, and you forget there's markets moving, there's new ideas coming from talents, there's companies who are leading in a different way, and you have to be humble and active to think about that and stay fresh. The other thing for us, I mean, DEI set up, how is it set up at Schneider Electric? There are some formal teams, like I have a small global team, but to be clear, often it is, like I used in the beginning, a labor of love. People are doing it as a part-time gig. People are doing it because they're part of an employee resource group. So there is a challenge, but a potential beauty of just animating, right? Our job is also to get our employees and our workforce super excited about the topic. And we do have an internal advisory board. So there's 14 members, half women, half men, all different countries, all different businesses, different leaders that really meet with us every quarter to set the tone, set the priorities, move the strategy forward. And we count on those folks. We beg, borrow, and steal ruthless, without any hesitation, because we have to amplify to get the organization energized on the topic.
Yes, that buy-in is so important. And we've said that. And I think what you're doing and what you're saying is so valuable too, because of not only the internal, but the external efforts. Because when I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's a mission. It's beyond any corporation. It's beyond, any singular effort. This is something that we should all come together and align on. Even I see competitors who come together with their teams to share resources and come together on these. So how, at those levels, how do you maybe share resources and exchange the dialogue there?
It's, I guess for me, and I'm going to sound a little hokey here, but at the end, I think the intrinsic motivation of work is still a very profound and relevant thing for all of us. Like, we want to have purpose. We want to have meaning in what we do. And look at the chaotic worlds we've been living in these last few years. I think most of us, and it's not just next generation or whatnot, it's everybody. We want a meaningful rallying reason to come to work every day. So again, in the space where I work, diversity, equity, inclusion, well-being, coupled with our business, which is all about sustainability, it's all about energy access to people all around the world, it's all about net zero carbon emissions. I am benefiting from that fusion of those two things, right? Meaning it's not easy, and I'm not saying it's like the only reason, but it helps us really amplify with our employees, but also in the marketplace. I think companies, and we've seen this trend in the last decade, companies realize it's, the triple bottom line, or however you want to term it, companies realize that it is, yes, shareholders, returns, investors, but more so the ecosystem of all your stakeholders, including society at large. It matters. And there's a business rationale for that. Now, some of the naysayers say, well, ESG has been challenged in the market. Investors are not as keen on it. But I don't really buy that. I think the long-term game, there's a mutual interest and there's a mutual benefit for still doing good and doing good for your business and also for society. And you can call me hokey or too much of a dreamer, but I think in many cases, the business results speak for themselves, right? And certainly from a talent perspective, more and more of our employees want to work at a company with a meaning, right? So that's something we really relish and we leverage.
And that's what we rally behind at Symba.
Yeah.
Why we were so excited to have you on board. That's all our mission. And we really believe in this in so many aspects. Like you said, there's business outcomes, but purely intrinsically, it's what we should be doing. It is what is right. And we see this actually really strongly represented in emerging and young early talent in Gen Z being very, very loud and vocal. I'd love to understand how Schneider Electric has defined early talent and how you have this segment of your workforce really as a part of your D&I strategy.
Absolutely. It's super key. if I step back and think about my DEI strategy in general, we've been very deliberate to say, because it started out more historically around gender, and gender is still very important. It's part of our metrics and part of our ambition. But in the last few years, we've been very deliberate about making sure it's all diversities, and generations is a key part of that. Our approach is really first starting with how do you optimize all generations at work? So Schneider's a 190, almost 200-year company. So it has a long history. It has employees who have decades of experience as well as a lot of newbies. And we have to figure out how all generations can work together. That's the first tenet. The second thing to your question, absolutely. Next gen early career is super important to us. They fuel a lot of key skills, key mindsets, and also, frankly, fresh ideas, right? So that is a piece of our strategy. We have a metric actually as part of that ESG ambition that I told you about to continue to double the size of our university engagement. So apprentices, interns, full-time hires by 2025. So we are on track to do that. And what I love about it, it's kind of those topics where it's so universal. So back to my global role, every country is really supportive and engaged about building those relationships and finding cool opportunities for that so-called Schneider Next Gen. So it's definitely campus, and we do a lot of efforts there, and that's part of my mandate. And it's super fun and it's super refreshing. It's a very competitive market, but we are really tapping into a lot of students who bring early expertise. So of course, technology, engineering, sustainability skills are some of the top 3 that we're really recruiting for. And also early career, we define as also about 10 years experience. So it's not like a specific age, but certainly folks who have about 10 or less still, and many of them are still learning, right? One of the last things I'll say, our philosophy at Schneider when it comes to talent development is about a T-shaped. So we really want all of us to have a few domains of expertise. That's your vertical, but we're really encouraging also the cross connectivity of the horizontal part. And that's been a really appealing notion for folks, all generations, but especially that next generation, because many of them want to have pretty rapid, sometimes so rapid we can't meet the need, but pretty depth and the breadth in their career. And that's something because of our size and our diversity we can offer.
I love that approach, the T-shaped concept. And I think that what we're seeing now with AI and technology, that we might have to reinvent ourselves, and we need some of those skills that can be transferable. So it's really powerful. And we hope that, it doesn't just stop with the next gen. It goes into that talent development aspect that you're talking about and their career trajectory. So how do you encourage this diverse, young, early talent to grow into leadership roles?
This is super important. If I jump forward and I because I often look at the data around, say, our top 1,000 leaders, right? These are senior executives, regardless of generation or age. One of the key development areas for them is indeed being a good manager. I know it sounds so basic, but many of us kind of do our job, we're good at it, we're often technically equipped, and we stumble into general management or people management. And what I encourage all our early career talents is, even if it's not formal people management, because maybe you can't find that type of job right away, leading a team, there are so many ways, project leadership, agile team leadership, so many ways to build a few good stones to put into your toolkit on how you lead people, how you influence, how you build productive, effective teams focused on the same mission. And again, it sounds quite straightforward, but we know even when you look at the most senior folks in our company and from a level, that is still an area that I could certainly say openly we can improve on. And I think when people find themselves with even informal leadership experiences, it is such a stretch experience, right? I mean, maybe yours was teaching in the first time. It certainly was for me. It's not a formal leadership role, but you are responsible for the collective learning and the cohesion of a group of people, even if they're 8-year-olds or 14-year-olds. And that is something that is such a gift, and it's such a huge accountability and not easy to do, right? It comes with practice, it comes with training, it comes with mentors. And that's something that we deliberately try to do and impress upon our, say, more next-gen talents to do that as early as possible.
I really appreciate that perspective. And I think we need even more of it because I think with COVID, sometimes it was difficult to tap into that mentorship because we were all on Zoom and we're zoomed out. So I'm really excited that we're investing and seeing that you're investing a lot more in those efforts because that is the future and leaning more into that. We're really excited about energy. We feel like energy is in this nice wave of almost reinventing itself and really communicating the future of clean energy. And we'd love to get your perspective on maybe from that campaign and movement, how you're communicating that in potentially your D&I strategies to attract more talent.
Absolutely. So again, like I said, I benefit from those twin missions, right? So really going towards net zero through decarbonization, through electrification to achieve a sustainable future. So I feel very lucky to have those wins at my back to be able to marry that with our equity ambition. Probably for us, what's most important is making sure in the market, we are touching on a simple mantra, but not an easy mantra. So from business perspective, we think a lot about energy access for all, right? And there's still a lot of people in the world, especially in emerging markets, who don't have basic access to energy. How does that translate into Schneider's business and what we do with our workforce? Well, one piece for us that's quite pragmatic is besides the business of it, we really make sure all our employees, or we encourage them to participate, right? We have a huge volunteer it's called the brand name of volunteering support and making sure you also spend time in the community and in the practice. We also have a very rigorous sustainability school. So it's making sure that, and it's levels of certification, it's the big picture of what the sustainable picture is, and then pragmatically what it means to the average customer on the ground. We want, even if you're not in sustainability strategy or you're not in sales there, we feel obligated that each of us has a business and moral responsibility to understand that topic. And that translates nicely from a DI perspective because it's for everyone, right? Again, we don't want a certain group or certain talent segment to be involved.
Those are perfect examples to understand how you're really involved and engaged in the community as well. And to wrap up our episode, we always ask this question around our mission, open up the workforce. As a Tech for Good company, we are on a mission to create equitable access to jobs and wealth creation. And we'd love to get your perspective, Tina, on what do you believe are the next steps talent leaders need to take in order to open up the workforce?
So I love the question, and I love, because when you and I were in the first exchange, I love the mission that you guys have, right? And I think there's often debates back and forth about, can tech be a good enabler? And I fervently believe if well thought through and in managing the integrity, absolutely. And it's the same thing, right? I really believe smart technology appropriately used can accelerate our DEI ambitions for sure. Now, the workforce of the future, you can either be totally terrified by it or excited about it. We, and myself personally, I'm super excited about it. I think, if anything, it has taught us to be more agile and more creative in how we think about workforce solutions. So one of the things at Schneider, we're super interested in different flexible ways of working. And every company is doing that. So it's not like we've discovered this, but how do you really make sure the needs on the ground match some of the ways you can offer ways of working? And it's beyond hybrid work, which is our standard mode, but it's also things about job sharing or gigs, internal, external, or just part-time work. We are seeing from the data that for many employees, and often say an underrepresented group or a group that might be facing some more pressures from an overall equity perspective, those are often the areas, the anchor points of why they come and why they stay. And that's super important to us. So one example, we have an open talent marketplace of us. So it's something we rolled out in the midst of COVID, and it's AI-driven technology that just matches around the world business needs. Hey, it's Tina, I got a project. I need someone for 6 months. This is the spec. Or we have a permanent job, mentoring, career matching. We have created it to be a one-stop platform, one-stop shop for our employees, not something corporate, not something manager-driven. It's really supposed to be employees sharing their data, seeing what the market supply is within Schneider, and making a match. And we have about 80,000 people on it now, and we've had about 27,000 engagements, right? Someone's found a job, someone's found a gig, someone's found a mentor. And I really believe the way of the workforce of the future is much more employee empowered, employee driven with, again, smart data, smart technology properly used.
Wow, Tina, I'm feeling incredibly inspired, especially as a tech founder, to hear how you are embracing technology to really facilitate so many meaningful exchanges at such scale on a global workforce. It's really impressive. We're such big fans of the work that you're doing. We really look to you as a leader in this space. And before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Well, again, thanks so much to you and Symba the opportunity. Love the work that you guys are doing. So let's definitely stay connected, right? Because the world is small. And I think when there's communities that have common missions in the long term, there's plenty of reasons why we can stay connected and do cool things together. I think the other thing I would say is it's so obvious, but for many of us in VUCA times when the world is more uncertain, how do you use that to your own advantage versus being frozen or petrified or stifled by it, right? When that happens, it creates really natural opportunities because things are constantly moving. There's a velocity that's unpredictable. So it's each of us shifting our mindset, at least the areas where we can influence. Certain things in life you can't influence. A positive spirit, whether it's shaping a more equitable future, finding the next cool job, connecting with people, with your customers and making great products together. I think that perspective, that attitude is something we need to keep hold of in a very challenging world. Again, I'm getting a little hokey, but I generally believe that. Like, it's a little bit about positive psychology and trying to make a challenging situation into something really amazing and beautiful.
I personally couldn't agree more with that. I'm going to hold on to that perspective, and I channel that in all the work that we do at Symba. So appreciate you for being on and the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Tina.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.